Chapter 43 Black Hoof Blackmail. If someone were to ask, spending a night in a jail cell was not Twilight's idea of a good night of rest. Especially when she had to loan the bed for her son for his well-being, meaning she had to sleep on the concrete floor. But, given the excruciatingly long day she had gone through, she'd be lying if she said that her night hadn't been restful, at least. Maybe it was all of the running around she had done. Maybe it was the fact that she hadn't really slept all that well the previous night regardless. Whatever the case, Twilight had a pretty painless night of sleep. It could have been worse. Even her dreams were mundane, free of any spiteful interventions from the Mare in the Moon. As the morning sun came to greet her through the barred window of her cell, Twilight found herself so enraptured by her rest that she wasn't imminently roused from her slumber. The warm rays of the sun seemed to be encouraging her to continue sawing logs like a fat, lazy cat. But the sound of someone tapping their hoof against the metal bars of her temporary residence, while not extremely loud, was enough to stir her from her rest. She looked towards the intrusion to spot a unicorn guard she didn't recognize on the other side, a mare younger than Twilight, who looked like she was trying her best not to gawk at the literal alicorn in the room. A reaction that Twilight was starting to get used to, as much as she hated to admit it. At least the pony gazing on her wings was trying to be subtle about it. Small victories.
I was sent to get you.
The guard began, her voice caught somewhere between the official tone expected of her position and the meek jitters of a nervous filly.
Your situation's been sorted out. Awesome.
Twilight half growled through a yawn as she got her hooves under her. She took a bit to stretch out her stiff joints and muscles, and already felt the unfortunate consequences of sleeping on the floor. Despite how deep her slumber had been, she was sore. It was more irritating than anything else, but still. Her neck popped loudly before she turned her attention back to the guard.
Hey, do you know what time it is?
The guard blinked a few times at the question.
I think it's almost 3. Did you not wake up at all?
Twilight was utterly bewildered by just how long she'd been able to sleep, given her condition. But she quickly wrote it off as a side effect of her exhaustion from the previous day. Out of the corner of her eye, Twilight spotted 2 ignored trays of food, lunch by the looks of it. The neglected breakfast must have been picked up when they were brought their next meals. Glancing over, she saw Spike must have been just as tired as she had been, as he was still asleep on his temporary bed. He looked so peaceful and calm as he snored away through the sunlight, a sight that made Twilight's heart flutter. But even though she didn't want to disturb him, he had things to do, and she wasn't about to leave him alone in her prison cell.
Spike, it's time to wake up.
She gently cooed as she nudged at his side.
It's time to leave.
A low, rumbling growl came from deep within the reptile's throat.
I don't wanna. Comfy.
Twilight growled back in response to this, frustrated by her son's disobedience. As much as she loved him, she really didn't have time for this right now. And so she turned to the guard with a sly grin.
Could you go get a bucket of water?
Spike reacted instantly, shooting up like a rocket as his eyes struggled to open. I'm up. It's fine.
Well, he can really talk.
The guard murmured under her breath, now entranced by Spike rather than Twilight.
Guess I owe Fleet Feather 8 bits.
Ignoring the childish side comment, Twilight simply helped Spike wake up and down from the bed. From there, It was simple enough to get him caught up on what the situation was and pushing the door open. As she and Spike stepped out of the cell to follow the guard, the young mare to escort them looked absolutely shocked.
Wait, was that unlocked the whole time?
It wasn't an outrageous question, given how Twilight was meant to be in custody.
Would it have really mattered if it was?
Twilight asked in amusement.
Alicorn, remember? Right. Let's just go.
The dejected guard's mare didn't say much else after that. She simply gestured for the two to follow her before making her way down the long hallway of holding cells. Twilight spared a moment to check on Knox before moving along. The Sarosian was still catching up on his sleep, snoring away at the back of his cell. It wasn't anywhere near as an appealing sight to behold as Spike's slumbering. The way the Sarosian was sprawled out over his bed, his mouth hung slack open as he lightly snored, was almost grotesque. It honestly felt more like looking at a corpse than another breathing pony. But it was a sight that Twilight didn't linger on before moving to catch up with her escort. Their stroll through the precinct wasn't long, and the odd stares that Twilight got from the passers-by were equally short. Most of the town guards at least seemed to know about her existence by now, and the most excitement she was causing was the occasional turning of heads. Even if she would have preferred to have not been exposed at all, it was nice that the people around her were adjusting to the sight of an alicorn in their midst. It felt almost liberating to have that heavy cloak off her back as well. Regardless, it didn't take long for the two to arrive where they were needed, back at the interrogation room they'd been dumped in last night. But unlike last time, they wouldn't be left alone for hours on end. As the door opened, Twilight noticed that there was someone waiting for them. Sitting with a dull expression was Rainbow Dash, looking less tired than she had been last night. Though while the sight of the unamused Technicolor mare was one thing, Twilight was more interested in the layout of the table that divided them. Dash had with her a pile of papers, likely relevant to the business that was about to go down, a rectangular box, and a stack of napkins and 3 beverages. 2 of them were familiar coffee-to-go cups, while the third was a very kitty-looking disposable to-go cup filled with what was probably apple juice. The top of the box was made of cheap clear plastic, putting the donuts held within on full display. A baker's dozen, by the looks of it.
Perfect timing, you two.
A half-smile came across Dash's face.
Your coffee was getting cold.
Spike knew the sight of a box of donuts when he saw it, and the promise of food was enough to make him scamper into the room with feverish vigor. He got situated in one of the chairs and locked his sights on the container of sweets, demonstrating great patience by not simply digging in then and there. Twilight, on the other hoof, took a moment to cautiously take in her surroundings. While it would have been easy enough to guess that this was simply an act of kindness from Rainbow, Twilight couldn't help but feel like she was being buttered up. Some attempt to get her to be more cooperative than she already had been. It was enough to earn her suspicion and caution, if nothing else.
What's the occasion?
Twilight slowly followed Spike in and shut the door behind her.
Pinkie Pie? She insisted that you get some half-decent food in you.
Dash's answer was dry and blunt, and it washed away Twilight's doubts.
And she wouldn't let me go until I agreed, so here you go. It's her treat, you can thank her later. So you're the one who talked to her?
Twilight sat down without looking away, lifting the box's leg and drawing forth a couple of donuts. She delivered them to Spike, alongside a few napkins and the apple juice, and he began eating as soon as Twilight let go of them. She settled for one of the cups of coffee, when Dash didn't object, and took a quick drink.
Didn't that blow your cover? I'm also technically a Wonderbolt, remember? That part's not a secret.
Dash adjusted her posture with a grunt before taking another swig of her own coffee. She sighed in satisfaction after the sip of dirty bean water before crushing the now empty mug between her hooves and depositing it on the table.
And Wonderbolts are always on the clock, even on vacation should the need arise. And, well, the need arose. Perfect cover story.
The Pegasus laughed to herself for a moment before turning back to Twilight with a cocked brow.
How the hey is it that I'm better at keeping secrets than you? Professional training, maybe?
Twilight shrugged.
So, what's the damage? Damage might not be the best word, if I'm being honest.
Dash broke eye contact as she admitted that. A moment later, her professional demeanor returned, and she tapped a hoof on the table to draw emphasis to what she was going to say.
But before that, I gotta know. You talked to Knox last night, right? That's one way of putting it. I'm surprised you didn't hear about his crazy yelling.
Spike felt the need to add.
Scared me half to death. Hey, I've been busy.
Dash's explanation was almost dismissive.
So did you get anything useful out of him or what?
The room was filled with the resonance of Twilight's sigh as she mentally went back to that conversation. There wasn't much of a need to think on it for very long. There hadn't been much in that discussion that could be called useful. This encore Knox had mentioned might be something, but just knowing about the final stages of Knox and his allies' plans didn't really mean much if they didn't know where to find the rest of the group. But there was one thing that still stood out to Twilight. A thought that prompted her to gaze at Spike with worry. The significance of this information was mostly personal, but she was hard-pressed to think of anything else that would satiate the agent's thirst for information.
Not exactly. But I might have a lead. Do you remember that mare from the other night, when we were sneaking into Golden Oaks?
For a moment, Dash didn't look like she knew what Twilight was talking about. That was until the metaphorical light bulb went off in her head, and it all came back to her at once.
Ah, right, you mean Starlet. Don't say her name.
Twilight's command came out with far more authority than she had any right to have in the situation. A fact that wasn't lost on Rainbow, given the glare she gave back. Quick as a flash, Twilight's eyes were made to steadily point towards Spike, hoping to convey the meaning behind her motivation.
I just don't want to hear her name again.
The excuse was solely meant for Spike's sake, as the brief exchange had earned the dragon's silent curiosity. It was obvious enough at this point that the most recent part of the conversation had raised at least one question in his mind, but Twilight had extinguished it with her response to Rainbow. So instead, Spike returned his attention to the sugary feast that had been provided. The memory-altering magic that was so widely used in this town was sketchy at best, and the last thing Twilight wanted to do was cause Spike any more unnecessary pain. Now, the exact reasons for these actions were lost on Rainbow Dash, but she at least seemed to get the message.
Okay. So, you got something on Crazy Cultist number 2?
It took Dash longer than it probably should have to come up with a substitute for Starlight's name. And even then, it wasn't particularly creative.
On the contrary, I think she might have something on me.
Twilight grimaced.
She basically used Knox as a tape recorder. Left a message for me, saying we need to talk. Wait, is that what got him so worked up?
Spike worriedly injected himself into the conversation, no doubt looking back on last night's events.
I can see why you don't want to talk about it.
Rainbow Dash mused over this new information like a sour piece of fruit. A moment later, she let out a low whistle.
Dang. That's not what I was expecting. Welcome to my world for the past few days.
Twilight said in jest, her half-joke making her look back on the events that led her here. All of this had started, in earnest at least, when Starlight Glimmer showed up at the library on a Friday. a day that felt like months ago now. And from that moment on, that unusual mare had continued to show up again and again. Undoubtedly, she had a part in this whole mess, but her role was still murky and unknown. Up until now, Twilight had just assumed she was one of Knox's associates in his occult dealings. There's plenty of evidence to support that theory, but there was also no denying that Starlight had her own agenda to attend to, and for whatever reason, it seemed to revolve around Twilight. The mayor had gone out of her way to keep Knox from discovering Twilight and Dash's hiding place the other night, and she even went further out of her way to tip Twilight off to Spike's whereabouts just yesterday. And then there was that note that had led the Alicorn to investigate the Everfree, which, looking back, was more than likely Starlight's doing as well. And who could say for sure what else that unicorn was doing behind the scenes? Well, at one point Spike did, but that information was currently inaccessible, much to Twilight's frustration. She made it a point to bring these findings and her concerns about them as well, making sure to leave out Spike's involvement, as to not cause any other unpleasant memory relapses.
Dang. You're really in a sticky wicket, huh?
Dash let out a short, slightly anxious chuckle.
So, I'm guessing you're going to go get some answers? Well, that depends. Am I free to go? What?
There was a moment of confusion from Rainbow as Twilight's question was left unanswered. But then it caught up with her and she gasped, seemingly surprised by the information she should have already known. There was an awkward pause before she spoke up.
Right, I almost forgot about that. That's rude.
Spike scoffed in response. Rainbow seemed to be offended by that.
Hey, they didn't exactly come up with some grand mastermind plan to deal with Egghead here. It was kind of hard to remember the fact that she's, a felon right now.
That earned Twilight's undivided attention and her paranoia. Whatever fate had been decided for her wasn't going to be good. That much now seemed to be certain. And it was only now, after the point of no return, that Twilight was starting to feel regret for laying her crimes on the table to be judged. It didn't help that yesterday's actions had encouraged Rainbow Dash to inform her superiors of Twilight's interference in the investigation on Knox's lair. Among other things, no doubt. The only shred of hope Twilight could hope to grasp at was the idea that willingly admitting and accepting her fate would soften the blow a little. It also didn't help that she had been insisting to Spike that everything would be okay, but now she was starting to really consider the possibility that it wouldn't turn out like that.
And what exactly are they planning to do about that?
Twilight asked, perhaps a tiny bit too loud.
Well, in about 2 weeks, you're going on trial. Makes sense, considering your list of accomplishments. Assaulting and threatening officers of the law, reckless endangerment of 2 civilians.
Rainbow took on a particularly bitter look as she mentioned that bit. She must have been talking about Twilight's conversation with Pinky and Rarity.
And interfering in Black Hoof affairs. And in 2 weeks, the bigwigs are gonna decide what to do with you.
Spike made his concern known with a stifled whimper.
What are they gonna do with us? You? Probably nothing. You'll just get shipped up to Egghead's parents or something like that.
There was an almost kind disinterest in Rainbow's tone. If Twilight had to guess, she'd say that was Dash's attempt at comforting the young reptile. An appreciated attempt, though that appreciation was lost when Rainbow turned back to her with a more stern expression.
You, on the other hoof, well, that depends on how you do in the next 2 weeks.
Twilight was intrigued by Dash's choice of words.
What kind of actions are we talking about here? Well, I was talking to my boss up in Canterlot. We have ways to talk over long distances, don't worry about it. And like I said last night, I brought you up by name. 'Cause you don't get to act like an insane lunatic and expect to be rewarded for it. Anyway, I told her your name and she had, a reaction.
Dash leaned back in her chair and gazed up at the ceiling, taking a moment to figure out how to word her next sentence. She looked back to Twilight with a neutral look that was difficult to read.
You already know that we have a file on you. I really wish I didn't. Your history with a few select ponies of power and a few ideas I pitched on your behalf has earned you a bit of leeway. Not much. A bit.
Deciding that she needed to draw this out, Rainbow took the time to stretch her forelimbs over her head with something akin to a yawn.
It's not enough leeway to get you out of this mess entirely. But if a certain someone were to, say, help clean up this whole choir mess in the next 2 weeks, then another someone might be willing to, I don't know, sweep some of the messier accusations under the rug, if you catch my drift. So I'm being blackmailed.
There wasn't a moment of hesitation from Twilight.
Yep, pretty much. It's like you said, having an alicorn help out would be helpful. My boss certainly thinks so. Besides, black is half of our namesake. Did you think we were above blackmailing someone?
Dash couldn't stop herself from chuckling at her own joke.
But to be fair, you wanted to solve this mystery from the get-go anyway. Well, now you get to. And you get to stop yourself from being labeled an enemy of the state. Really, I'd say you got the better end of us on this one.
Didn't really feel like she was getting the better of anything, though. In Twilight's honest opinion, she felt like she was being given preferential treatment, thanks to her past actions and connections. In fact, that's exactly what this was. And that preferential treatment had earned her the right to be a criminal resource, someone to be utilized for the sake of the nation as a form of repentance for her misdeeds. It might not have been the severe punishment she had been expecting, but at least they hadn't just absolved her outright. Twilight still had to do something about it. Oddly, she was kind of relieved about this.
So, we're gonna be okay?
Spike's cautious optimism drew Twilight out of her reverie, and his unknowing act of kindness earned him a smile from her.
I told you we would be, didn't I?
Twilight's mood changed significantly, practically on demand.
You know, I wouldn't call being blackmailed by one of the highest legal authorities in the country okay, but, whatever floats your boat.
If there was a way to make that sentence more blunt, Dash would have been hard-pressed to find it, if she had tried. It was enough to take Twilight's chipper mood and put it right back where it had been when they started.
You're not exactly wrong, but I can fix that.
Twilight grumbled as she stood up, stretching briefly before turning back to Rainbow with a small sigh.
All right, where do you want me to start? That lead of yours seems promising,
Dash answered as she also stood up.
Might be able to get some useful information out of her.
Twilight couldn't agree more, making that clear as the group began getting ready to head out. The remaining donuts were put away for later consumption. Dash took some time to make sure she had all of her belongings, and Twilight made sure that Spike hadn't missed anything while cleaning up the residue of the donuts. This was going to be the third time he'd be seen in broad daylight, and she wanted him to be at least somewhat presentable. Most of her anxieties about that particular tidbit had been dealt with the previous day, thankfully, but it still wasn't going to be easy walking around town anymore. Twilight chose to keep those feelings to herself for the time being, though. They had more important things to deal with. There would be time for these feelings later. And so, like that, they were off.